Final hour of the program, and Bold Republic is back on the air. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. And by video, Maureen from Wyoming Liberty Group, looking bright-tailed and bushy-eyed. How's the weather down there? Because we're like still in the negatives up here, like -5.
No, I think we might be at 0 by now, but it's been brutal.
Heat wave. We brought a guy up from Tampa who's been part of the program, even though he's in Tampa Bay for quite a few years, named Tim. And he noticed yesterday that there was 83 degrees difference between where we are here in Wyoming and his home in Tampa Bay. So that sounds like, a major weather event happening there. But it's just Florida's still in the 80s. Yeah, all right. Well, we need to take a vacation. So Maureen from Wyoming Liberty Group is going to help us take a look at, first off, the governor's state of address is one of the things that you wanted to talk about, and where it leads. And Maureen, I was also thinking about a lot of the surrounding states as well ought to listen to what you have to say, because right now, even in South Dakota, Montana, a lot of governors are giving their state of the state address. Yeah,
that's right. I think it's that time of the year. And, of course, a lot of governors, our governor included, has got an election coming up. So a lot of them are positioning themselves now for this upcoming election season, and that's really bad news for taxpayers.
Okay. So what did Governor Mead have to say this time around?
Well, the State of the State starts, the governor will give the State of the State on Monday.
Already. Okay.
What he has done already, though, is given his budget proposal.
Okay.
If we look at what he said in his State of the State last year, what we can predict from his budget proposal that he gave just this past November is what he's going to say in his State of the State this year.
Okay.
So and I think what we need to really understand is what the governor says he's going to do, stem the tide of budget growth, is quite different from what he is actually doing, which is pretty much the opposite. You know, he's proposing an increase in bureaucrat salaries. He's forcing taxpayers to essentially bail out the government pension plan, the bureaucrats' pension plan. And what's even worse, if it could even be worse, I suppose, is he's giving back a lot of the money that was trimmed from departmental budgets last year. I mean, actions speak louder than words, Mr. Governor.
Well, I had, last time I interviewed the governor, a nice long conversation with him. He was very proud of where that last budget had gone. And at the end of his long spiel, I let the man talk, and then I asked him a very simple question. So are we spending more or less? And has government gotten bigger or smaller? And he had to finally break down and admit, well, okay, we're spending more, government's getting bigger. So under his new budget, is government getting bigger, or are we spending more?
Government's getting bigger, and we're spending more. So this is what I really think people need to take away from our discussion today. That the governor has got big spending plans on the horizon, and what the legislature must do now through this budget session that's starting on Monday is stem that spending tide, because if the legislature doesn't act, our children and grandchildren are going to be left with a legacy of debt and higher taxes.
Well, now, the governor would probably make the argument that, hey, we're in a surplus right now, so what would be the problem? And I think probably a good way to take a look at this is if you are purchasing a house, Maureen, and you're taking a look at your mortgage, and you have that balloon payment down the road, is this what we're looking at?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, as most homeowners know, if you decide you're going to make a big expense based on windfall gains, what could happen in the future is that you're going to lose your house. Unfortunately, what most politicians seem to have learned is that if they make spending promises with windfall gains, they're likely to get reelected.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. The governor hasn't said whether he's going to run again or not in the upcoming election just this year, later this year. But given what this budget does, I mean, the only conclusion I can come from is that this is a pre-election budget. So, you know, I'm out on a limb. This is my prediction. The government, at the end of the, you know, when the budget session is over, March the 7th, he's going to announce that he will in fact be running for re-election. I mean, the funny thing about the budget is that I was talking to one legislator on the Appropriations Committee, and he said, you know what this really reminds me of is that old Prego commercial from I think it has to be the 1970s, where the son, he's making pasta sauce, and the dad, he comes in and he says, what are you doing? You're making pasta sauce from a jar. And the son says, Dad, you know, this is good pasta sauce. He says, but you know, the dad says, but you know that the sauce has to have garlic. Dad, it's in there. But the sauce also has to have basil. Dad, it's in there. Well, this is what Governor Mead's budget is like. You know, if you have a spending request, if you're some special interest group, or you're a bureaucracy, or you're a bureaucrat, and you want the governor to spend more, well, you know what? It's in there.
Okay, so it sounds like, you know, from what you're saying, he's probably building up a budget that would make people happy. In other words, budget time is Santa Claus and Christmas time when it comes to an election year. And then maybe he can go ahead and fix that later when he's out of an election year.
No, that's the problem. Okay, so what the state of the state will likely focus on is increasing budgets and increasing the size of government, and that's because he essentially has two spending priorities. One is more to departments that had their budgets cut, like Game and Fish. We can take a look at this later on if we have time. But if you look at the Game and Fish budget proposal, it's given back everything that they supposedly cut and more. But the really big one is the governor says, well, you know, we have all this extra cash. Let's spend it on stuff that we can afford right now. And one of the big things is bureaucrat pay hikes. But the takeaway from all of this is that Monday is likely to be a very sad day for taxpayers. And the reason for that is because where he is planning on getting this money from is a windfall. Is essentially something called capital gains. What the revenue last year ended up being much higher than predicted, but the reason for that was because of some realized capital gains. So the value of some stocks went up. They managed to take advantage of that. They've got some extra money. But as most investors know, a capital gain today can turn into a capital loss tomorrow. And in fact, this is what has already happened in the state. Because, you know, this capital gain, capital loss thing, unrealized capital gains, capital loss, is a moving target. But in fact, the Craig co-chairman, so the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, is the government's sort of economic forecasting group, and the governor and the legislature base their spending or saving priorities based on what the Craig has said. Now, the Craig co-chairman Don Richards said already that one of the portfolios that the government depends on, a fixed income portfolio, has already had a capital loss. So even though they have had a capital gain in the past, we're already now looking at capital losses. And in fact, Mr. Richards confirmed that after June 13th, we've had capital losses. We don't offset losses against previous gains, but against future gains. We are now in a holding pattern until the next gains accrue. And in an increasing interest rate environment on a fixed income portfolio, we could be waiting for a while. So we've had a gain. Now we're in a bit of a loss position. We could be in a bigger loss position going forward. The takeaway here is that the governor has got these long-term spending priorities. I mean, bigger budgets in bureaucracies, higher pay. I mean, try to cut back on pay. That just doesn't happen. He's funding these with short-term revenue gains. I mean, this is just a recipe for higher taxes in the future. It is absolute folly to fund long-term spending with here today, gone tomorrow revenue.
Well, and to give credit where credit's due, Wyoming is one of the few states when it has some money, some extra money, they go find ways to invest it so it can grow, and hopefully the state has the savings. And that's not just what government should do, that's what people should do. But then there's always that mistake of, oh, look, we have some extra money, we better go find a way to spend it, which I guess you and I would agree, that's the cart before the horse. You need something, so you spend the money. It's not that you have money, so you're going to go find out how to spend it. And I love the example that was given to me this weekend. It's like the woman who goes shopping and sees something that's 50% off. Well, if it was $100 and she bought it for $50, that means she has an extra $50 to spend, right?
You know, that's actually quite a funny one, because, you know, I make that joke all the time to people. Well, you know, I could buy this Giorgio Armani coat. It's on sale, 75% off. I mean, it still costs $1,000. I still spend $1,000 on a coat, you know.
You've never really spent $1,000 on a coat, have you?
No, I didn't spend $1,000.
Okay, good.
This is just an example, just to see how crazy that whole mentality can be.
Somebody wants
Even
to
at
buy
75% off, the coat could still be $1,000. You're not saving, whatever that works out to. It's crazy.
But just tossing it out there, if somebody wanted to buy Maureen a $1,000 coat, I don't think she would necessarily turn it down.
No, I wouldn't turn it down. No,
not at all. Okay, so now let's take a look at how this relates to, because I know we've talked about this before, Wyoming pensions, because they're still kicking this can down the road. And when I brought up balloon payments a little bit earlier, that's part of what I'm talking about. Doesn't Wyoming have a balloon payment coming down the road in the form of pensions?
Wyoming has a fiscal disaster coming down the road. I mean, just take a look at what's happened in Detroit, and you can see what could eventually happen here in Wyoming unless legislators actually get the fortitude to make real reforms with this defined benefit pension plan, because the type of pension plan that bureaucrats benefit from is the same type of pension plan that municipal workers in a number of cities were benefiting from, but those cities are now bankrupt. And those pensioners are now looking at a huge reduction in the amount of money that they thought they were going to get. Detroit, for instance, pensioners are looking at receiving only 16 cents for every dollar they were promised. So, I mean, just imagine. You're expecting to get $1, now you get 16 cents. You're 85 years old, maybe you're not in the best of health. What are you going to do? You're going to go back out and get a job? No, you're in serious trouble. And it's the same kind of thing that's coming down the road here in Wyoming as well. Sure, we're a lot farther away than Detroit or a lot of these municipalities, but it's a similar program. And what the governor is going to do, in fact, is make it a lot worse with these pay increases. Right now, what the governor has proposed to do is taking $50 million from this capital gains and putting it into bureaucrats' pay increases. He wants to see a 2.5% increase for 2015 and another 2.5% in 2016. Now the Appropriations Committee said, oh no, that's too much. We're going to make it only 2% next year and 2% the year after. But the reality is that you're looking at having people who may not have had a pay increase or may have actually seen their pay go down funding these pay increases. And of course that feeds right into the whole pension problem. Now, ironically, the governor is using this whole idea that, well, the government has got this big turnover problem, and so if we increase wages, that means turnover will go down. But the reality, again, is that it's like he doesn't think anybody's going to actually check up on what it is he's saying. But if you look at government turnover rates in the first quarter of 2013, now that's July, August, September, that happens to be the quarter with the lowest turnover of all of the quarters in a year. Government turnover is 11.9%. The only thing that even comes close to that minuscule level of turnover, really, is the education sector, which in fact is primarily government as well. But if you start looking at the private sector, you've got the hospitality group that has a turnover rate of 38.1%. Construction has a turnover rate of 36.5%. Professional business services, which you could kind of say might be sort of a similar profile to government services, is 30.7%. I mean, the average for the whole state is 23.8%, which is about double what the government has. So this whole idea that, well, turnover is so high that we need to increase pay is just, completely bogus. So you might think, oh, gee, well, maybe turnover rates are just so much higher now than they were before. But that's actually not true either. If you look at how turnover rates have changed over time, both in the government sector and average for the entire state, you can see essentially the pattern is that during good economic times, the turnover rate goes up, both in the government sector and in industries across the state. And when we're in a recession like 2010, you do have a fall in turnover rates. But so if you look at 2006, for instance, the government turnover rate in the first quarter of 2006 was 13.8%, but the average for the entire state was 30.6%. Now that dropped to 2010 to 10.5%, which is essentially the height of the recession here in the state. And in the state on average, it was still more than twice that much at 21.7%. Now it's gone back up to 11.9% for the government sector and 23.8%. So, the idea that using turnover as an excuse to jack up pay for bureaucrats is a bit ingenious. And the worst part about this is that if you look at median income in Wyoming and how that's changed over time, in 2009, median income actually went down by 0.99%. In 2010, it went down by 1.02%. In 2011, it went down by 1.53%. And in 2012, now that we're moving back, and I think the oil and gas industry was doing pretty well, median income went up by 1.91%. Bureaucrats, if they didn't have a pay increase, their salary didn't go down. So you're looking at forcing people who may have had either a stagnant income or now have a lower income to fund these higher pay packages for somebody else. And of course, what this doesn't even include is the fact that the governor also wants to roll back very, very small gains that taxpayers have realized when it comes to funding somebody else's pension plan. Because a pension plan is about $2.2 billion with an unfunded liability. The funding ratio is about 72.8%. And so what that means is that if the pension plan were to close down today, bureaucrats would receive 72.8 cents for every dollar that they'd been promised. Now, that's still probably a lot more than what a lot of other people have. I mean, I don't know if you have a pension, but here in my job, I don't have a pension. I have to save up for my own pension. I can't afford to fund the pension for somebody else. I mean, can you afford to fund somebody else's pension?
I can't even afford myself right now, but hang on just a minute because we got to finish up this conversation with Maureen Bader from Wyoming Liberty Group in just a moment. Maureen from Wyoming Liberty Group is joining us, and I would like you to pick up in the last 4 minutes here, Maureen, on something you just mentioned, which I think is a great point. So here we have folks who I do appreciate a lot of the work that people in Cheyenne and work for government in Wyoming do. However, they get a raise every single year. Most of us don't get a raise every single year, and they have a pension that's paid for by other people. How much do they have to pay into their own pension at this point?
Well, this is the thing, right? For a long time, they paid nothing into their own pension. So the taxpayers were funding the entire pension benefit for other people. Then I've actually got a blog on this with all the detail, all the data, which I don't have here right now, that shows exactly how that started changing just a couple of years ago, because of course people realize, I mean, all you need to do is look around and see what's happening with these defined benefit pension plans. They are collapsing under the weight of their own assumptions. You know, I think Karl Marx said that capitalism would collapse because of collapse internally. Well, defined benefit pension plans are collapsing because their assumptions just haven't panned out over time. So it started back a couple of years ago. The bureaucrats actually had to put in 1.43% of the 14.12%, I think it was, of their total pension contribution. So it was a minuscule amount. Right now, the taxpayers are contributing $7.70 for every dollar contributed by bureaucrats, and that's a huge improvement over what it was before. I mean, it used to be they were contributing everything. But now what the governor wants to do is actually roll back that little minuscule amount that the bureaucrats were actually putting into their pension plan, and as well as a little bit more that they got. And also there's another proposal right now for the pension contributions to go up, because quite frankly the only way that these programs are going to become solvent is for contributions to go up. But what we're saying is that bureaucrats have to contribute more themselves. You can't expect taxpayers to be bailing out these pension plans little by little or all in one huge blow in the future. So what the governor is saying, no. I mean, gee, poor bureaucrats. That means that they've got less income to spend. So if they have to pay more of their own salary into these pension plans. But this is actually quite problematic.
Part of your idea that we simply just cut off anyone, let's say any new employees working for the state, simply not get a pension plan so we could pay off the people that we currently have?
No, that's not what we would be proposing. We're working on a big paper on that right now. There are actually quite a few different proposals that are out there. One of the key proposals, however, is to have new employees come in, and instead of being on the defined benefit pension plan, be on what's called a defined contribution pension plan. The problem with defined benefit pension plans is that the government employee will actually get paid out based on his 3 to 5 year best earning years. What that does, for instance, if you've been working as a secretary for 20 years, you go get your degree, you work as an engineer for the last 5 years, even though the amount of money that you would have been contributing, even if the taxpayers were contributing on your behalf, into that pension plan would be based on your secretary's salary. The pension payout would be based on the engineer's salary. So there are lots of different kinds of problems with this, and we're going to be putting out a paper on that soon with some recommendations. So.
Okay, as soon as you do it, gotta have you back for that. Sorry to bring the music up on it, but hard break. Thanks, Maureen. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.